Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to get right into it and break down what really happens during a cyber attack. We'll look at the core concepts you absolutely need to know to make sense of digital security. So, to make this all real, let's start with a story. This is Anne. And one day, she gets an email that looks completely legit, like it's from a company she really trusts. But it wasn't. It was a fake, a really clever trap designed to steal her most private information. So the big question is, what was really going on behind the scenes? Well, to properly understand an attack like the one Anne went through, we have to break it down into 4 essential parts. Think of these as the anatomy of any cyber risk. All right, let's dive in. First things first. Every single cyber attack, I don't care how big or small, it doesn't start with some big explosion. It starts with something much quieter, a pre-existing weakness.
That weakness has a name. It's called a vulnerability. The best way to think about it is like a crack in your digital armor. It's this passive flaw, just a little loophole kind of sitting there, waiting for someone to find it. On its own, it doesn't do anything, but it makes you open to an attack.
Now, this is the part that you really need to get. In Anne's case, that crack, that vulnerability, it wasn't in her computer's software. Nope, it was in her own human nature. The real vulnerability was her natural instinct to trust an email that looked official. And that's a huge point. Vulnerabilities are so often about people, not just about code.
Okay, so you have a crack in the armor, right? But that crack is totally harmless until something, or someone, comes along to take advantage of it. And that's where our next piece of the puzzle comes in, the active danger.
We call that active danger a threat. So if the vulnerability is the passive crack just sitting there, the threat is the active storm that comes along and targets that crack. It's the specific action an attacker takes to exploit that weakness. Let's go back to our story. For Anne, the threat wasn't her trust. That was the vulnerability. The threat was the phishing attack itself. It was the malicious action of sending that deceptive email. It was the weapon built specifically to exploit her trust. And this distinction is just so important. A vulnerability is a passive internal thing, like a bug in the software, or in Anne's case, her instinct to trust. A threat, on the other hand, is an active external danger. It's an action from the outside world designed to exploit that internal flaw. See the difference? But of course, a threat doesn't just appear out of thin air, right? Somebody has to create it. Someone with a purpose, a motive. And that brings us to the threat agent. This is the actor, the attacker, the actual person sitting behind the keyboard who comes up with and launches the threat. They are the who behind the attack, the one with a goal in mind. And what's really interesting is that not all threat agents are the same. We usually think of black hats, the criminals hacking for money or just to cause chaos. But you also have white hats. These are the good guys, ethical hackers who are paid to find vulnerabilities to defend companies. And then somewhere in the middle, you've got gray hats who might find flaws without permission, but they do it to report them, maybe for a reward. So we have a weakness, we have a danger, and we have an attacker. This brings us to the final and maybe the most important piece of the puzzle. What's actually at stake here? What's the potential damage? This is what we call exposure. And exposure basically answers the so what question. It's the measurable, quantifiable loss or damage that can happen if an attack actually works. It's not some abstract idea. It's about the very real consequences. To put it another way, exposure puts a price tag on what's at risk. For Anne, the exposure was the loss of her credit card details and her login passwords. For a big company, it could be millions of dollars, stolen data, or a trash reputation. Exposure is what makes the risk real. And check this out. Here's a perfect real-world example. During that huge WannaCry ransomware attack a few years back, the exposure for every single infected computer was super specific, a ransom demand of between $300 and $600 in Bitcoin. That's it. That number, that is the exposure. All right, we've walked through all the key ingredients. Now, let's put all 4 of these pieces together. Let's build a simple but really powerful framework you can use to understand pretty much any attack you hear about. And here it is, the whole chain reaction. First, a passive vulnerability exists, like Anne's trust. Second, a threat agent, the hacker, creates a threat to exploit it, which was the phishing email. And finally, when that threat succeeds, it creates exposure, which is the potential for loss, like her credit card info.
This four-step chain is the fundamental anatomy of any cyber risk.
And remember, this isn't just some abstract theory for a textbook. It's a real, practical tool. The next time you see a headline about some big cyber attack, you can use this exact framework to break down what happened, who was behind it, and what was really at stake.
And that's our explainer for today. We've given you the framework, so now we'll leave you with a question to chew on. Now that you know what to look for, what's the single biggest vulnerability, and I mean technical or human, in your own digital life? Thanks for joining us.